It's 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. The house is quiet. No one's slamming a door down the hall. No one's calling his name. The fishing channel is going in the background. Not really watching it, just running. He's in his 50s, sitting with all of it. Maybe that's your friend. Maybe that's you. Gen X was the first generation of kids who came home to an empty house and just handled it. Nobody asked if they were okay. Nobody really thought to. And 40 years later, a lot of those same guys are in a house that's quiet again, and they're handling it the same way they always did. Whether that's working or not is a different question. Let's get into the actual psychology here, not the sad bachelor narrative, the real thing. How this guy got here, what his days feel like from the inside, where it holds, and where quietly and without much drama, it starts to slip. The numbers are worth knowing, but let's keep it brief. About 2 out of 3 single men in midlife in the U.S. live alone. Back in 1970, only around 7% of midlife adults had never been married. By 2020, that was close to 30%. 1 in 3 men in midlife has never walked down the aisle. That's not a subculture, that's a structural shift, and Gen X is sitting right in the center of it. But the number alone doesn't tell you much. The reason a man ends up in that apartment, and what being there actually feels like, that's where the real psychology starts. There's something that happened to Gen X specifically that no other generation experienced quite the same way. They were the latchkey kids, the first real wave of them. Kids who came home to empty houses, let themselves in, made their own food, and figured out their own problems. Research from the early 2000s described Gen X as one of the least parented generations in American history. And while that sounds harsh, the data actually complicates it in an interesting direction. Studies on independence development suggest that reduced adult supervision, when it happens early enough, accelerates certain skills. Problem-solving, tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to sit in a quiet room without needing to immediately fill it with noise or people. The psychologist Donald Winnicott argued that the capacity to be alone is one of the most important signs of emotional maturity a person can develop. Gen X was essentially trained in that, whether they signed up for it or not. So, when a 54-year-old Gen X man says he likes living alone, he's not performing contentment. He's reporting a skill he's had since he was 10. The quiet doesn't unsettle him. He learned to sit in it in a house where nobody was home. But here's where it gets complicated. When emotional self-sufficiency gets trained into you early enough, it stops feeling like a skill and starts feeling like a personality. And then you stop being able to tell the difference between not needing people and having just gotten very good at convincing yourself you don't. That distinction matters more than most people realize. The road that leads to this life isn't the same for everyone. The destination looks identical from the outside. Same apartment, same quiet evenings, same dinner for one. But the experience of being there is completely different depending on how you arrived. There's the guy who never married. It wasn't a protest or a wound. It just kind of happened. He was in his 20s building something, a career, a life that made sense to him, and the partnership kept getting pushed to the next chapter. He had relationships, some of them long ones, but they never tipped over into permanent. And the longer you live alone, the more your whole life shapes itself around one person. The apartment, the habits, the schedule, the way you like your coffee, all of it calibrated to exactly you. You get so good at it that restructuring everything around someone else starts to feel like a disruption rather than an upgrade. When someone asks, "Don't you get bored?" he usually looks a little confused, not defensive. Just like the question doesn't quite land. Bored with what? The life he has runs on internal fuel. That's not boredom. That's just how it works. Then there's the guy who was married, and it ended. That's a genuinely different experience, and the research on this group is sobering. Studies have found that unmarried men between 40 and 60 are 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide compared to married men in the same range. Divorced men specifically come in at 8 times the rate of divorced women. 8 times. And the reason researchers keep landing on isn't weakness or some character flaw, it's structural. A lot of men built their entire social world around their marriage without realizing that's what they were doing. She was the one keeping the friendships going. She remembered birthdays, planned the dinners, and maintained the connections. When the marriage ends, it's not just the relationship that collapses. It's the whole social infrastructure it was holding up. He's not just alone in his house. He's alone in a way he doesn't have the vocabulary for because he never had to build those systems himself. So, you've got 2 men, same apartment building, same age, same number of dinner plates. One of them has been doing this for 20 years and has optimized every corner of it. The other is doing it for the first time at 51, figuring out slowly and sometimes painfully that independence is something you have to learn. It doesn't just show up automatically when you need it. And then there's a third type that doesn't come up much. The widower. Men who had the life, the relationship, the whole structure, and then lost it, not to a court date, but to something they never saw coming. These men are in a different kind of alone. The house still has 2 of everything. They're not learning to live alone from scratch. They're learning to live alone in a space that used to mean something else entirely. Research consistently shows that widowed men have some of the highest rates of depression and social isolation in midlife. And the main reason is the same as for divorced men. The person who managed the social connections is gone, and he never realized how much of his world she was holding together until it wasn't there anymore. But unlike divorce, there's no anger to process, just absence. And that's a particular kind of hard. So, what does an actual day look like for this guy? Because the version people imagine and the version that exists are usually pretty different. He's up early, not because someone's making noise, but because that's when his brain works. Coffee is the same every day, exactly the way he wants it. If he's still working, he goes. If not, there's always something. A project, a YouTube rabbit hole about old motorcycles or woodworking he'll go 3 hours deep into and not apologize for. Dinner whenever he wants, could be 5, could be 9, entirely his call. And there's a quiet satisfaction in that, which is hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. The evenings are split into 2 types pretty cleanly. One type fills the silence. Something's always on. A game, a documentary, a podcast. He's not uncomfortable. He just functions better with a signal in the background. The other type sits with the silence, like it's an old friend. He reads, thinks, stares out a window for 20 minutes, and doesn't apologize for it. Both of these men are managing the same underlying reality. No one to answer to. No one to account for him. For some, that's freedom. For others, under the right conditions, it becomes something else. Here's where the data gets specific in a way that's worth sitting with. A 2026 study on Gen X men and friendship found that 95% of men said friends are essential to a happy and healthy life. 95%. So it's not that they don't care, they absolutely do, but caring about something and being equipped to maintain it are 2 different things entirely. Men in the study were less likely than women to volunteer, attend any kind of regular gathering, or belong to a local organization. Only about 1 in 5 men belongs to any kind of local group, and researchers described men's friendships as high passion, low vulnerability. They'll talk about sports, politics, music, whatever happened in the news for hours. But they won't say, "I've been off lately. I haven't really talked to anyone in a while. I'm not doing great." That part doesn't come out. Not because they don't feel it, but because the wiring for saying it out loud was never really installed. And somewhere along the way, not asking for things became a form of identity. Men connect shoulder to shoulder. They do things together. Fish, work on something, sit at a game. The conversation happens around the activity. But when you live alone at 55 and your shoulder-to-shoulder buddy is 3 time zones away, the connection fades into a group chat nobody reads. And since these friendships don't officially end, no conflict, no falling out, both men just assume it's still there. Inactive, like a tool in the garage. It exists. It's just not in use. And the longer it sits, the more restarting feels like it needs a reason or occasion. So, they wait. And years go by without one. About 60% of Gen X adults qualify as lonely, higher than boomers. And these are people who from the outside look completely fine. Jobs, routines, homes, cars. The loneliness doesn't announce itself. It looks like a guy who's always busy, always handling something, never needs anything from anybody. And if you push him on it, he'll change the subject to last night's game. Here's something that actually gets missed. Living alone in your 50s, when you've been doing it for a while, comes with genuinely good things. Not as a spin on the negatives, but actually good things worth naming. There's a stability to a life you built yourself entirely. Every routine was chosen, not negotiated. He eats what he wants, sleeps how he wants, and spends his money on what matters to him. On a Saturday afternoon, when everything's in its place, the weather's right, there's nowhere to be, and nothing he owes anybody. On those days, the life he has is exactly the life he'd choose. He's not performing contentment, he has it. And here's the part the data shows that people don't expect. Loneliness goes down as people get older. Adults in their late 40s and 50s report the highest rates. Nearly half say they feel lonely in that window, but the number drops steadily into their 60s and 70s. The Gen X man struggling at 53 often feels different at 65. Something shifts. People get more comfortable in their own skin. The noise about what their life was supposed to look like gets quieter. That's worth knowing if you're in the middle of it right now. But there's a real risk in this kind of life that doesn't get enough attention. And it's not the loneliness people usually point to. It's the drift. The drift is what happens when there's no external structure and no one to reflect your life back at you. It doesn't arrive all at once. It happens the way most things go wrong. Gradually, quietly, in ways that feel completely normal while they're happening. You skip the gym one day, then it becomes a week. Meals get simpler, then careless. Sleep shifts a little, then a lot. And because there's no one there to say, "Hey, this isn't like you," nothing ever feels wrong. Your normal just moves. And a fully self-managed life can feel stable, even when it's slowly narrowing. There's no signal, no alert. Just a guy who looks at his routine one day and realizes, without any drama, that it's gotten a lot smaller than he intended. Not because something broke, because nothing stopped it from getting smaller. I noticed this pattern in myself during a stretch when I lived alone for a while. Nothing extreme. But I remember thinking I was doing fine, and then one day looking at my week and realizing it had quietly contracted. Less movement, less variety, less energy going outward. No single moment caused it. It just narrowed because nothing was pushing back. So here's what the research is actually showing works. And I want to keep this practical, not preachy, One study highlighted a group of men who started something they called Wednesday Waffle. Each guy would record a 2-minute video. No script, no topic, just whatever was on his mind, and drop it in a group chat every Wednesday. That was the whole thing. No scheduling, no coordinating, no pressure to be interesting. Just 2 minutes of being present in each other's lives once a week. And it worked. Not because it was profound, but because it was frictionless enough that they actually kept doing it. That's the real insight. Small, regular contact beats big. Occasional contact every time. A short text once a week does more than one long phone call every 6 months. The men who seem to age best in solo living aren't the ones who overhaul their whole social life. They're the ones who build in a few low-effort anchors. One consistent person, one routine that gets them outside the house, one thing that happens whether they feel like it or not, and actually maintain them. Tying interaction to an activity helps a lot, because that's how this kind of man is wired. Not, let's sit down and talk about how we're doing, but we both show up here on Tuesdays. The conversation becomes a side effect, not the goal. And side effects are a lot easier to maintain than goals. And the most important anchor is the structure itself. In a fully independent life, structure is what replaces everything else. It's what keeps the drift from accelerating. Fixed times, fixed habits, things that happen regardless of motivation. Because motivation in a solo life is the most unstable variable there is. When structure holds, everything else stays manageable. When structure starts slipping, things tend to follow in a sequence that feels inevitable in hindsight. So, what's the real picture here? He's not broken, not waiting, not secretly miserable behind a well-maintained routine. He built something, and a lot of the time it works well. He can sit by himself in a way most people can't. He runs on internal fuel, and it runs pretty clean. But there are the other days, sitting in a waiting room with nobody to text on the way over. A holiday that passes without a real conversation. That moment, right before sleep, when the house makes a noise and there's nobody to exchange a look with. Those days don't cancel the good ones, but they're real. And they show up in the data, and they show up in the comments of videos like this one. The gap between being alone and feeling alone, that's where the real psychology of this guy lives. He's been practicing not needing for so long, he often can't tell which side of that gap he's on. He can go 11 days without a meaningful conversation, notice it briefly, and file it under fine. Not because he's in denial, because the system he built doesn't have a meter for that. The wire goes dead quietly, and the light doesn't come on. Men's friendships often last 20 or 30 years. They hold on to the same guys from school, from their first job. But the wire goes dead. Not because they stopped caring, because nobody taught them how to keep it live. They wait for a reason to reach out, and sometimes years go by without one. And if you're the guy watching this right now in a quiet house on a weeknight, I'm not going to tell you to join a kickball league. That's not your speed, and we both know it. But call that friend you haven't talked to in 3 years. Not because something's wrong, not because you need anything from him, just because 3 years is too long. And the guy on the other end of that call is probably sitting in a quiet house too, in his own routine, waiting for a reason that never quite shows up. One call. Something frictionless enough that you actually do it, because the line isn't dead. It's just been sitting in the garage. Someone just has to pick it up. If this exploration of the Gen X psyche changed how you view the quiet houses in your neighborhood, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the social histories and psychological patterns that often go unspoken. Let's build a more connected future. The next deep dive into the human experience will open soon.